while I was at Sacred Heart, I'd become immersed in the cadet system there. We had a Hungarian teacher, a bloke named Laszlo Gimish, and he thought the cadets were his baby. He was a grade 7 teacher, and he was a very unusual man. He had been in the Hungarian tank regiment, which had fought on the German side, had fought the Russians, etc. So he quickly knew where his best place was when the Russians moved into Hungary. He left Hungary and came to Australia. But he was a wonderful teacher. And someone who exuded life. He was terrific. And he got us into his cadet unit at a very early age, as early as he could. So I spent about 5 years there and ended up being a cadet under officer and went through the various courses of corporal, sergeant, the rest of it they used to do up at Woodside. And in those days, a lot of us, that was our only sort of holidays too. Going up to Woodside for a week, and then after that, El Alamein up from Port Augusta. That was the real variation, apart from the school holidays that we would have, but you wouldn't necessarily go anywhere. You do your swimming and all that sort of stuff and enjoy it, but the cadet camp was something really different. And I enjoyed that a lot. And I got I suppose I had an interest in the Australian Army at that particular stage.
And Dad,
yeah, because of Dad and what he'd experienced, etc. He'd always had this great level of mateship with the people that he'd served, and he always went to the Anzac Day marches, etc. I then thought about it and thought, well, if I was serious about the Army, I could go and have a look. And the shortest possible time that I could do that in and spend that amount of time was by doing national service, which was only 2 years. I think the regular Army at the time, the period was 3 years, absolute minimum, probably 6 years, etc. So I volunteered for national service to get in as quick as I could at that particular point.
So you were a volunteer
Nasho, yeah.
And could you just take us through how that worked? What happened there? How did that?
Oh, it was just basically the same sort of process. You could just register for national service and volunteer, so you didn't have to wait for your number to be picked up. You more or less went in with whatever intake you were going to be allocated with. And there, of course, there's an interesting set of numbers that I ended up being in the 13th intake of national service. I also ended up being at recruit training in Hut 13 in 13 platoon. Which was all very sort of wonder about this 13 business. Because eventually I ended up being in 3 platoon A Company 6 row, and of course the call sign was 1-3. Most people realised whatever preference they put down, they were going to be destined for infantry, about 90%, etc. So there was the occasional fluke where people put down survey and got it, or did something like that. But so I put infantry down as my first 3 choices, and then you were, what was it, a week or 2 later, you were marched off to the area theatre, and then they called out what you call allocation was. And I was most surprised when mine was called out, and I was in Armoured Corps. And there were people almost crying because they'd put down, catering and service corps, etc., and had been allocated, of course, to infantry. So I had to get this changed, and our training company commander was a captain, and obviously then I found out he was Armoured Corps. And when I went up to him and said, "Look, this has got to be wrong. Can you change this?" And he said, "We need people like you in the Armoured Corps." And I said, "Well, look, my dad was in the 2nd, 3rd Machine Gunners, and I'm afraid if I get allocated to armour, he's never going to speak to me again, or if he dies, he'll be turning in his grave forever. So anyway, I must have put a very convincing sort of argument to him. He changed it, and so put it back to infantry. So that was pretty decent of him.
Unusual.
Pretty decent of him. And it was shortly after that a call came out from 6th RA that they wanted people to volunteer to go up to 6th RA in sunny Townsville and do corps training up there. And instead of going to another horrible destination, I think it would probably have been Singleton, to do infantry corps training. So at that stage, that appealed. That was travel. Oh, stunned. It was getting towards, it must have just been the end of August or September at that stage, and it was still pretty cold up at Puckapunyal.